First of all, thank you all for coming out on a very, very rainy, windy, unexpectedly not so fun evening. And I know that there are many events going on right now that could have your attention. In fact, there were 4 or 5 that people were talking about at the last event I was at. So first of all, thank you all for coming out. This is a forum on education and workforce readiness. And for the folks that are filming it for CCTV, this is taking place at Werner University Center, Western Oregon University on April 23rd, 2014. For the folks that are filming it for the other campaign, this is a forum about education, workforce development, and hopefully, though it will be a policy debate, it's not a partisan debate. Nobody here is going to be talking about individual candidacies or individual policies that are related to an election, but hopefully a lot of people are going to be talking about structures, systems, questions that are on our minds, clarification about certain things that are going on in the legislature and at the local level, and we're going to be hopefully leaving this room a little smarter, a little more aware than we entered it. I know I will. Before I begin with the introductions around down the line, I want to emphasize what a cool and wonderful panel this is. For those of you that know any of them, any one of the folks assembled has the experience, has the knowledge, and has the leadership to make a profound difference on the future, because they're certainly making a difference in the present. As a group, it really does reflect a very informed, precise perspective about our region. So I hope that you will join me in giving them a quick round of applause. The quote I want to start with as we go down the line and let people introduce themselves. It is rumored that shortly after the convention where they came up with the U.S. Constitution, Benjamin Franklin was asked, "Dr. Franklin, what have you and your friends done? What have you made for us, a monarchy or a republic?" And he was rumored to have said, "A republic if you can keep it." Over the past 200 years, we've struggled over different types of challenges to try to keep a public education system, a civic engagement, and a sense of community. We all know that over the last many years, a lot of those things have been put at risk, and we know that the economy of the 21st century is not what the economy was of the 20th century, and we are struggling with potentially legacy systems. That's what the focus is tonight. So we have among our panel, we have an adult literacy specialist, we have student leaders, a person that represents student leaders, we have a professor who just recently got back from a conference where he won Best Faculty Paper, keeping Western Oregon in the news there. We have 2 school board members. We have the Chief Executive Officer of a workforce training program. We have a real, live, living superintendent of public schools, one of the most brave positions out there these days. And overall, we have Ms. Yasena, who's actually going to be working to keep this project alive. She's the intern that's been recruited specifically to help keep this idea factory moving forward. So I'm Paul Evans. I'm the facilitator tonight. My job is to hand off the baton and make sure that people have an opportunity to speak. We're going to start with introductions. We're going to go to the first question, which has to do with the greatest challenges facing individual organizations. Then we're going to turn and focus on the tool or tools that people wish they had. And then we're going to take a break. And then we're going to come back and invite you, the audience, to ask questions or to follow up and hopefully gain some clarity and learn together. So I'm going to stop. I'm going to hand it off to Buzz. Why don't you introduce yourself and what organization you represent?
Paul, thank you very much. My name is Buzz Brazo, and it's my honor to have the opportunity to serve both the Independence and Monmouth communities as the superintendent of public schools. Our school district is approximately 3,000 in size and has 5 schools. A high school of about 900 to 950, depending on what part of the year you're talking about. A middle school that's around 675, and 3 larger elementary schools, 2 that are over 500 and 1 that is approaching 450. As all the districts are in the state, we have the opportunity to move forward and to help our kids prepare themselves to attend universities such as this. And one of the great things about being here is we get to work with this university on a direct basis. And that relationship has been essential to the positive things that are happening right now. So to those of you out there from Western Oregon University, thank you very much for the opportunity to collaborate with you.
I have to make it that close. Or maybe you do. I'm Kathy Zahner. Is this loud enough? Yeah. And I'm the chair of the Central School Board. So technically, I'm Buzz's boss. Many times you wouldn't know that. I've been on the board for for 7 years. I'm a local girl. I grew up out at PD. Actually, I'm a product of the Dallas school system, but have lived all of my life here. My children and my grandchildren have gone to school here. I worked here at Western for nearly 20 years, and then I made a major change in my life and worked in the law field for 10 years, which was a huge educational experience for me. And when I retired, I decided I could give back to my community more and began volunteering in the school district, and opportunity became available to be a school board member, and that's what I've been spending a good deal of time doing for the past several years.
Tony Frazier, Executive Director of Job Growers Incorporated, which is the Workforce Investment Board for Marion, Polk, and Yamhill counties. We handle Workforce Investment Act dollars. It's roughly $4.5 million in this fiscal year. That gets divided into adult and dislocated worker training and youth training. Approximately $1 million of those dollars are invested in youth programs. We have 4 of those, 2 in Marion County, 1 in Polk County, 1 in Yamhill County. And then our adult centers are in Salem, Woodburn, Dallas, and McMinnville.
I'm Nancy McMorris-Oddix. I'm a member of the Salem-Keizer School Board. I'm in my 5th year on the school board, past chair. I'm also a member of the Oregon School Boards Association Legislative Committee and a member of the Oregon Educators Benefits Board. Salem-Keizer is obviously the district that's just to the east of you all. It has 41,000 students. We have the distinguished challenge of having the greatest number of students in poverty of any district in the state of Oregon, and the greatest number of students who are English language learners. We have 67 schools, and currently we're looking for someone that we can boss as we're doing a search for our superintendent.
Hello, my name is Ed Dover, and I am a professor here at Western Oregon University. My field is political science. I've been here for 27 years. I came in virtually when the school changed. We were a very small university, primarily a college of education. We did not have a College of Arts and Sciences until 2 years before I came here, and virtually all of the degree programs in arts and sciences were started right about the 1980s when I arrived. So I was here literally from the beginning of the arts and sciences focus here. In addition, I've also seen this university grow from 3,000 students to 6,000 students, as well as, of course, a lot of buildings. In addition, I've also been very active in the faculty union, representing faculty in collective bargaining negotiations for over 20 years. I've chaired 6 bargaining teams. I've also served as president of the union for 7 years, and I've had a chance to, in many ways, the collective bargaining agreement we have at this university, about 65 pages, I had a hand in writing a great part of it.
Hi, I'm Yesenia Valentin, and I am a student here at Western Oregon University, and this is my 3rd year here, and I'm a political science major, and like they stated, I'm going to try to do my best to work with you guys in a group work so that we can figure out what are the most important issues that you guys are most interested in so that we can have some changes.
Good evening. My name is Mario Parker Milligan. I'm the Legislative Director and full-time staff lobbyist for the Oregon Student Association. We're a statewide nonpartisan coalition of student governments and student groups that advocate for students in the legislature and on campuses. We represent over 120,000 public university and community college students across the state, including students here at Western Oregon. A big focus of our work is legislative advocacy, and we do a lot of, we build our power through voter registration and get out the vote efforts. In 2012, we registered over 50,000 students across the state, which ended up being the largest nonpartisan voter registration drive in Oregon's history, but also the largest nonpartisan voter registration drive in any state in the past decade at least. And we use that to advocate for tuition freezes as well as a lot of other policy policies that students put forth. I'm not a student currently. I'm employed by students, and I like to say that I'm the only person in Salem that is hired and directed and paid for by students.
My name is Vivian Ang. I'm the Executive Director of the Mid-Valley Literacy Center in Keizer. We started this program 5 years ago, and it was a result of downturn in the economy, and the community colleges were closing their literacy volunteer programs. And I had worked at Chemeketa Community College for 9 years as a literacy specialist. We train volunteer tutors. We use some of the same system that we had done at the college, and we saw the need in the community to continue providing adult literacy. So we provide English GED, Spanish GED. We also provide all levels of English for speakers of other languages, and we also do a very specific vocational program for English learners who need to work on skills that are directly related to their jobs. One of those is a pre-CNA, so that people who are interested in becoming certified nursing assistants go through our pre-CNA, and then through a collaboration with the Providence Benedictine Nursing Center in Mount Angel, those students go on to that program, and we've had 59 students successfully complete the program. The last 3 classes, we've had 100% success of passing the Oregon State Board of Nursing exam and becoming full-time CNAs. We also provide citizenship classes, and then a Spanish literacy program for those adults who never learned to read and write in their first language. We offer this program through collaboration with the Mexican consulate. We have all the materials from their adult literacy program in Mexico. So people come to our center, learn to read and write in their first language, and then they're able to learn English. And then we also provide basic computer skills, and we're working now with a new program to develop the curriculum for medical interpreters. And then we have a collaboration with Willamette University to provide high-level ESL for exchange students that are coming in from other countries that are in their Masters of Law program but need to improve those English skills at that high level.
Okay, thank you. And Vicki, if you could introduce your interpreting team.
Sure. I'm Vicki Darby.
One of the things that we believe is really important is trying to be as inclusive as possible, and sometimes we forget that when people are going through channel surfing, it helps if they can actually see what you're talking about. So thank you again, panel. Lots of interesting places, lots of very important organizations going on. We're going to start, I think, with Vivian and say, all right, so all the things that you're doing, and we've had a phone conversation, and thanks to your supporters, I'm a little bit aware of all the different kinds of things you do. Other than money, which we always wish we had more of, I understand that. Money isn't necessarily the solution. Sometimes it can help you with the solution. But money aside, what are the greatest challenges, or what's the one or two specific obstacles that really are getting in the way of doing more of what you're trying to accomplish, or maybe even as you plan for the future, you see as a challenge?
One of the things that we see is the challenge for adults who need to get a GED in order to get a job or get a better job. The challenge has been with the new GED curriculum that just came out as of January 2nd of this year. Adults are finding it more challenging, and yet we know that the skills that they're learning with the new GED program are important for those job skills and college ready. We know that those skills are important, but it takes more volunteers. So one of the challenges is to have more volunteers from the community who would be willing to help adults. It isn't just about providing instructional assistance to an adult in the areas of language arts, math, science, social studies, but it's also mentoring. Many of the adults who come to us lack the self-confidence to be able to be confident enough to take those steps that they need to not only get the GED, but go through some life skills, job readiness programs, thinking about what they are able to do in the future, and they just don't know how to do it. The volunteers are the key. We have trained almost 500 volunteers who are now working in 6 counties in Oregon. Those volunteers have the heart to change lives. by bringing that word of encouragement. So volunteers are the key to the program. We do the training, and a person does not have to know a second language to be a volunteer.
So Vivian, to follow up with this particular challenge, if people are out watching the show and they see what you're doing and they want to join up, they want to help, what type of background does a volunteer need, and who should they try to contact, and how do they actually show up and help?
We always say that if you have the heart, we'll teach you how to teach English. We can't give you the heart, but if you have the heart to help adults, we can teach you how to teach English or GED or any of these other subjects. One of our challenges has been to get volunteers from the Latino community so that they can help their own folks to help them with their language skills. And that has been difficult because in the Hispanic community as a whole, volunteerism has not been strongly focused on in their countries. And so we're trying to redirect some of those thoughts in the Latino community to show the value of giving back to the community by being a volunteer.
Okay, thank you.
They can contact us directly at our center.
All right, and we will make sure that that information is available. Mario.
Since I can't say money,
You can say it, it's just beyond money. We always know that that's an issue, but beyond money.
yeah, I was actually going to say it. Money's not the issue because I think we have the money to put into higher education. We're just not spending it in the most wise ways. We're spending a lot of money on our prison industrial system in Oregon. We're spending in the neighborhood of $30,000 on inmates, whereas for public education, public higher education, we're spending a little over $2,500 per university student and a little over $1,500 per year for community college students. So I think there's a lack of public will that translates into political will. We have a handful of legislators in both chambers, in both the House and Senate, who want to do like big changes to make higher education more affordable and more accessible for all Oregonians, but they point to polls that show that the public doesn't support it, and we're like, I don't think that's actually true because we're talking about higher education in different ways, and if we talk about it in a way where it's a public good and a public not just a commodity, but something that we absolutely need to invest in higher amounts than we are now, then we can get there. I think the public is shifting, especially in Oregon, where we have a growing divide between our middle class and everybody else, that legislators aren't willing to take drastic measures to change the way we fund our education and even structure education in general in Oregon. So I think there's a lack of urgency within students, within staff and faculty on campus to work together to move these ideas forward, and working in communities and working in silos. That's been a big issue that we've noticed is we find pockets of students who want to do this work, and some it's falling on, I don't want to say deaf ears, but you're talking to a brick wall sometimes when you talk about higher education and the cost. Students, I've been at OSU doing voter registration for the past few days, and one of the talking points is 15 years ago tuition here was $3,000, and today it's $9,000. And public investment is going down, your tuition's going up. Why is that? And some students are like, well, I can take out more loans, it's fine. But but when we talk about the back end, and when you look at how much you're actually going to be paying in those loans, students' eyes start to open, and you're like, okay, this probably isn't right. When students are leaving college with $30,000, which translates into $60,000, $80,000 when you add up all the interest over the 30, 40, 50 years you're going to be paying for it. So I just said a lot of stuff.
Just so we can condense it down, perhaps, so I understand what you're saying. What my mind goes to is, because as a person who teaches rhetoric and speech, communication seems to be the issue, but there seems to be a disconnect between what we used to know as a society and what we know now, in that the GI Bill that sent millions of servicemen, not just to higher education, but also to trade school and other apprenticeship programs, literally built the middle class.
Right.
And there seems to be the generation in between, maybe, or the second generation in between, that doesn't necessarily see the value of that level of public investment. Because you can look at it different ways of how they got the GI Bill, but it was still a public investment in people going to school to get skills for an economy.
Right.
So perhaps how it's being packaged or how it's being connected may be an issue for further discussion. Is that fair?
Yeah. I don't think we talk about it enough, and we don't talk about it in the most common sense sort of way.
Well, I won't suggest that I'm speaking common sense. I'm just saying that may be helpful. So, Dr. Dover, greatest challenge. You've watched education. You've been involved in education. You've trained lots and lots of people. Myself, Evan, lots of people that are in this room today. Waylon, what do you think are the greatest challenges?
Well, I think I would say that there's an interrelated set of 4 problems, and I'd like to just mention these as students, faculty, staff, and politicians. First with the students. I'd like to reiterate what we just heard, but this is very important about students, is the question that as we see a decrease in funding of higher education, as the state has assumed a less active responsibility as it has, ultimately the burden falls on students. Ultimately, they're the ones that pay the price, because ultimately they're going to be paying a higher and higher percentage of the university cost through tuition. When I first came here 30 years ago, the students were paying less than 35% of the cost of their education. Today that has doubled. It's almost 65%. And not only are they paying a higher percentage, but of course inflation costs more than all the time. This means massive levels of debt. We are finding students leaving here with tens of thousands of dollars of debt. I think back to when I was a student, I made it all the way to a PhD program without owing any debts. My wife made it all the way through her PhD program without owing any debts. That's no longer possible. And makes it worse is that our university is, in many ways, a university that serves much of Oregon. We have the highest percentage of Oregon students than any other university in the state. Moreover, many of our students are first generation. They're not from wealthy families. Many of them work part-time or full-time. I have had many students who work 40 hours a week and pull 4.0 grade averages. It's test time this week, and every time I give tests, there's always people, mothers, who have sick children who have to reschedule tests because they need to take a child to a hospital or a doctor. So that's the first problem. A second problem is want to focus on the needs and concerns of faculty. Faculty are very important to what makes a university. We are the people who are at the delivery level of education. And while we often see changes in education, high technology, a lot of other programs, in many ways, it's a lot like it was in ancient Athens under Plato and Socrates. It's still a teacher with a group of students. And whether we're meeting in the Athens forum or whether we're having high-tech distance learning, it is still the same idea. Teachers have some things to say. And one of the problems that we find time and time again is that far too many people feel that teachers are irrelevant to speaking about education. And as an indication of what I'm referring to, there is a lot of anger among faculty in the state, and you can see this in a variety of ways. Recently, there was a strike vote at Portland State University. You may recall that Portland State was sent out to have a faculty strike over salaries and other conditions. It was settled, but what is interesting about it was settled is that the faculty of Western Oregon achieved a higher salary increase from a higher base than the faculty did at Portland State. So what was that strike about? What was that strike vote about? Moreover, there was recently a vote of no confidence in the president, provost, and vice president for finance at Southern Oregon University. Several years ago, there was a no confidence vote at Eastern Oregon. Several years before that, there was a no confidence vote for the president of Portland State. What's going on? I can tell you from personal experience of having organized a strike vote here at Western in the late 1990s, it's not about salary. It is about status. It is about, as Aretha Franklin would say, respect. And I think that's vastly missing in higher education. A third thing I'd like to look at are staff. We have a lot of staff here. I'm referring to classified people, individuals who are the people who are the food service workers, who are the clerical staff, or the physical plant people. All too often, these people have been the ones who suffered the consequences of limited education funding. We have seen many times when We need to keep the tuition down, so we'll have a tuition freeze. We need to pay competitive salaries, so we'll be able to hire and retain faculty. So what is the solution? Take it out on the staff. The negotiations that the staff unions have had over the last 20 years that I've been here have been very ugly. Certainly nothing that the faculty has done has come along this line. We came very close to a system-wide strike by the staff. And I think there are some issues here because they were offered practically nothing from a very low salary base. And there's a sex issue here. The overwhelming majority of the staff in higher education are women. And so I am often a little surprised to hear some of the people at the higher levels talk about their commitment to equal rights for women and then turning around and trying to offer them some of the worst salary proposals that we've seen. The last thing I want to mention are the state's politicians. Certainly we have a vast array of people who are in public life. I respect many of them. There are some excellent people that we have seen in public life. I could go on for quite a while telling you some of the people, but one thing that does concern me about some of them, it is the tendency to overpromise. It is the tendency to promise things, particularly education, of which are unattainable. They're unattainable because there's no commitment to put the money behind it. I've been watching this for some time, since I've been in the state. I see promises about increasing the number of people who finish college, increasing the number of people who finish community college, increasing the number of percentages of people who graduate from high school. And by the way, let's see if we can reduce the spending on education while we're at it. So to me, I think that we have 4 areas of problems that I think are very much interrelated.
Okay, thank you. Also, just for those that we did invite OSEA, Oregon School Employees Association, the classified staff on the K-12 side of the house. Ed Edwards was going to be here, but he actually had a medical issue pop up. So we were going to make sure and have voice of the K-12 staff involved. There's at least one representative of SEIU in the room, so we're going to make sure that SEIU is involved as well because of making sure that those voices are heard. School board member Nancy, what is the greatest challenge or challenges other than trying to pick between 2 great candidates? I know that that's a big challenge right now, but in terms of the school district, what do you think the greatest challenges are?
Either I didn't read the questions clearly enough, or I don't remember you saying that we couldn't talk about funding. So
You can.
It's very hard to have this conversation without talking about funding. In Salem-Keizer, we've made reductions of $144 million in my time on the school board. And the budget that we heard last night, that I hope we will adopt, puts back about $9 million. That's just a drop in the bucket. We have such incredible need.
Could you, just to make sure, could you say that again so people get the numbers down?
We have made $144 million in reductions since I came on the board in 2009, and the budget that was presented to us last night will put back $9 million. So we laid off 400 staff.
Right.
Our class sizes are too big. The supports to students in the classroom, this new budget that was presented to us last night will put some counselors back in so that we have some of those supports. We've had 1 counselor to 2 to 3 schools, and these 2 to 3 schools aren't next to each other. I mean, it's a big town. There's lots of travel, so that not only do teachers have too much to do and too many students to teach, we also are instituting the change to the Common Core, which I believe is the right thing to do. It's raising the rigor across the system, but it's a huge, huge change. So that's another enormous stress on staff. In Salem-Keizer, we know what to do. We know that a quality teacher in front of every student, it makes the biggest difference. And I think we know what helps teachers move to their most effective. But we just can't do it without money. And this state has got to solve the issue that when the economy takes a downturn, that our children suffer. everywhere there's an achievement gap. We're closing our achievement gap. We could close it much faster if we had the money to put the resources where it needs to be. If you have read anything about the turnaround at McKay High School, we had a federal SIG grant, so we had money to put into McKay High School. We didn't use that money unwisely. We knew what to do. We did what needed to be done, and the dropout rate in that school dropped to near zero. Graduation rates are up. The whole climate in that school has changed. Kids are talking about college. Their test scores are the biggest jump in any school in the state. It's just been a remarkable turnaround. It's a myth that we have that if you put money into education, that educators, school systems don't know what to do with it. We know what to do with it. It has to be stabilized. We can't keep doing this up and down and up and down. And as far as I can see, we're not doing much up. We're down and down and further down. And then a tiny little up.
So just to clarify what I think I heard, first of all, there's 40,000 students. Is that correct? 41,000 students in the Salem-Keizer. You're second largest in the state. You've continued up until this year. You've cut the $9 million back. You're still in the hole, $130 million plus inflation probably. You haven't gotten back to where you were. And if I'm not mistaken, for K-12 or K through 3, the class size is 29.2 on average. So
Yes.
for listeners that are thinking back to when I went through the Central School District, when we had all kinds of options. We had shop class, we had FFA, and generally classes, except for history and a couple of the solids, were in the 20 to 22 category. Sometimes it was rough when it was 25. So sometimes maybe our own experiences are getting in the way of recognizing what it is that schools are dealing with. Is that a fair assessment?
Correct. Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. And it's okay that you talked about money. It's one of those things that sometimes people have to have in context, and that was very helpful. Tony.
So I think I should preface what I'm about to say by saying that I am a first-generation college graduate, and I've got 10 years in at-risk youth education direct service, and then a few years as executive director of Habitat for Humanity, where I brought a skills training program to the Salem area and then to Independence here in Polk County, and now serving as the director of this nonprofit, Job Growers Incorporated, and able to scale some of those youth programs. The reason I mentioned that I'm a first-generation college graduate is because I think one of the biggest challenges we have right now in respect to our youth population, and when I say youth, I'm talking about young people in the age range of 16 to 26 years old, so I could be saying young adults as well, is that in our high school education system, and just to put you at ease, Nancy and Buzz both know where I'm coming from as I start into my little spiel here. There is a very strong message amongst our young people that if you don't go to college, you won't be successful. And I will passionately say that that is not true. And here's why. If you look at the demographics of our high school population, many of those young people will not go to college for whatever the barriers are. So as a society, do we look at that population and say, well, too bad, you're out? No, these young people are brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And so what I'm saying is the challenge is we have to figure out a way to equalize the message. We can look at all kinds of statistics that show that we have a huge labor gap shortage, a huge portion of our working population today with the skill sets necessary to build this building that we're sitting in right now are retiring or leaving the workplace. We're not filling that pipeline. And these are jobs that are family wage kinds of jobs if we're able to skills train these young people into those positions. But they don't often learn about those things in the system, in the standard mainstream system. So I'm saying we need to figure out a way to equalize the message that there is opportunity on both paths and not downplay the labor path. And some of the stigma around that is, well, labor's dirty, and I don't know if you guys had a chance to tour through any of our manufacturing operations here in our Tri-County region, but as I tour through those operations, yeah, there's guys standing there in overalls, but you know what they're doing? They're pushing touchscreen buttons on machines that build stuff while they look through the glass at the machine doing the work. Our kids don't get this. They don't understand that this stuff is going high tech. And so then when you talk about a young person who's having trouble learning math in the classroom, I'm saying give them to me, I'll take them out to a job site and show them how to build a house, and they'll understand why they need to know that math, right? So there's some practical application pieces that get missed. And not every young person learns in the mainstream type of a system. Now, and I'm not knocking it. I think we all at this table have a role to play in terms of the education of all of our young people. White House released a study, commissioned a study, that got released talking about opportunity youth. That's a demographic 16 to 24 who's not working and not in school. In that study, it says that the cost, the very real cost to the taxpayer, is $14,000 per student per year. Now, this is a demographic that's not necessarily committing crimes yet. They're just not working and they're not in school, age 16 to 24. So we looked at the census data for our region, Marion, Polk, Yamhill County. We found about 9,600 of those. Well, if you do the math on that, that's $135 million a year direct cost to the taxpayers of Marion, Polk, and Yamhill counties for every year that we choose not to address this challenge of figuring out ways to get these young people skilled up. So, as an example, in one of our programs that's operating at the HALO program here in Independence, we did our first cohort. We had 12 students go through it. 10 of those students got jobs after graduating. So this was a 6-month cohort, and they worked on Habitat for Humanity projects to learn job skills with the intent of getting them ready to go to work. Now, these are young people that had dropped out of high school for whatever reason. So in that program, they're also working on getting their GED. There was a young man in the program named Jacob. Jacob wanted to become a union apprentice. He worked very hard in the program, and we took him to the Laborers Training Center on a field trip, him and the group, and he learned how to get himself on the out-of-work list. So he graduates the program. He goes through all of the process to get himself on the out-of-work list. When you're looking at going into the union, you can't go to work for a non-union contractor. So he got himself a job at Setnecker Farm. Then I got an email from the director of the program one day saying, hey, Jacob got a job with a union contractor. I was stoked. This was our pilot program. So I called Jacob up. I said, hey, I hear you got a job. Yeah, he was so excited. I said, well, tell me something. How much were you making at Setnecker Farm? He said, $9 an hour. I said, well, how much did they start you as a union apprentice? He said $16.97 an hour, and that doesn't include $6.67 in fringe benefits and accruing PTO that I get to keep when I have 240 hours in. I said, you went from $9 to $17 an hour? He said, yeah. He was excited. Here's the best part. That young man, 20 years old, was homeless couch surfing 6 months prior. Now, in that program, we brought together 6 partners, the City of Independence, Habitat for Humanity, Job Growers, 2 of our youth programs, and Sedcor Construction Alliance, which issued a certificate of competency for the 10 skill sets that we taught to qualify for the certificate that they issued. So 6 partners, and now we have a 7th because United Way has chosen to fund the program for another year. So what I'm saying is, through the alignment of those partners and people coming together and putting their heads together to address the challenge of how do we get skill sets into the hands of young people that can get them employed with living wage jobs, we did it in 6 months. So the other challenge we have is funding. Where do we get the innovative funding? How can the state set aside innovative monies to put together programs like that so we can scale that? Because we know we can train them well enough to get jobs. Out of this second cohort now, I just took a group of young people to Elkay over here. They make cabinets right here in your community. Ship them to 13 states, and then Hawaii, China, and Florida. Hired 50 people last year because they're increasing production. 20 more people this year they want to hire, and 20 more people next year. You have a growing company right here in your community. Took 5 18-year-olds. We had 7 graduate from our second cohort. 7 started, 7 graduated, 2 got jobs right at graduation. I took the other 5 to the plant over there to tour it so they could see what it was like. Clean as a whistle in there. It's not dirty work. It's good work. And they got excited. They asked lots of questions, and the guy that was touring us, who also helps hire, said, "I'm going to be very disappointed if I don't see your applications." 2 of those kids have applications in right now. I'm waiting to see how it shakes out. The jobs are there. We don't have a lack of jobs problem, folks. We have a lack of skills problem. Everywhere I go, as I visit these companies, they're saying, we can't find the workers.
So
And they're talking basic skills.
to follow up and to keep pace with time on this, I want to make sure I understand. So the program that you have right now, pilot program, 7 partners, perhaps more over time. Once upon a time in the K-12 system, we actually had voc ed as a major
Yes, we
part
did.
of what we did. And not, one of the, it seems, in terms of when you talk about education, formal college, quote-unquote college education, there is an assumption sometimes by some, not in this room, but some, that anything short of a 4-year college institution isn't necessarily an education. And ironically, if you actually look at the data from the post-World War II GI Bill, we talk about all the folks that went into colleges, but 2/3 of the folks that used the GI Bill actually used it in apprenticeship programs and community college that led to a skilled environment. So perhaps instead of trying to replicate this program in every community, there may be some lessons from this pilot program that could help inform funding for K-12 for bringing those skill sets into existing systems. Is that something that maybe could be looked at?
Absolutely. We need to look at every angle in respect to how to get at that.
Okay, thank you. Your turn.
Well, since we've already had one public school board member speak, and Dr. Dover has spoken about his experience here at Western, there isn't necessarily a lot I would add, excepting that when we're talking about funding, the stability of it, and I would add the delivery system of it. We're all right now in the process of preparing our budgets for next year. And we don't know what our numbers are going to be. You make your best guess in doing so.
I'm sorry, when you say numbers, you're talking about number of students or numbers from the state or numbers from the feds? Could you maybe run down that list so that people understand? Sometimes I think people think, well, you just get one
I'm
check in the
sorry.
mail.
We do not get one check in the mail.
How does it work?
And Buzz maybe have to help me with this because I don't know all the ins and outs of it. But in essence, the system is that there are we get checks on not even quarterly basis, 3 times a year. But it's not our real numbers. They look at what our numbers were for the past 2 years and they sort of average it out. But we get information that says, oh, well, you're going to get an extra $200,000. And then you get information that says, no, I'm sorry, we were wrong. It's really going to be $20,000 less than what you're getting now. And so it's an imperfect delivery system, not only in its timing, but the way it's communicated to us. And so when we go about the business of building our budgets, and we're talking about state school funding here, I'm not talking about grant monies, but we're talking about what we expect to get from the state. We don't know what those numbers are really going to be for the budget year that we're now preparing. We hope we know what our students are, and we base that, of course, over what our current year numbers are. We had a big blip this year, 100 students more in our district, which is not an insignificant amount, and there was no real indication that we were going to get those students, and so that makes you really scramble at the last minute when the doors are opening in the fall, and suddenly you have more bodies that are coming in. That's a whole different scenario.
Kathy, could I on that point,
Yes.
I want to make sure people understand as well. 100 bodies,
Mhm.
100 students in the classroom, that the school has to be able to serve, even though you hadn't
Absolutely.
planned on it. And they come with 4,400-ish per head, roughly. Is that still the figures?
65.
60, is that counting federal and state? So it's state,
State.
6,500? So 6,500 per head to take care of all the care, feeding, support, adjustment that you didn't really have prior notice to, because public schools, unlike privates, everybody that shows up on the door, you've got to be able to serve.
Absolutely.
And serve in a way that meets federal, state, and community standards.
Absolutely.
Is that right? Okay,
That's
thank you. I'm
absolutely.
sorry, please go ahead.
So that becomes a real issue, and just making sure that as you're preparing a budget, you're doing the very best you can on unstable numbers, really. The other thing I would say is that there's a lot more to the education of our students than teaching the curriculum. What's happening in our public schools is that we must provide meals, and not only meals, but they now have to be nutritious meals according to what the federal government says you can give them or can't give them. We have, and for our district, that has meant that we are providing breakfast. We have after-school snacks. We have vacation meal programs, summer meal programs, and for a significant number of our population, those may be the only real meals that those students get. So if you think about your child coming to school and they haven't eaten anything, or they might not have known where they were really going to be sleeping the night before, or that their mother and dad are working, but the conversation around, while they were watching TV was, I really don't have the money to do this or that or whatever. Our children are coming to school with a whole lot of stuff. They're carrying a heavy burden even when they get here, and so I think there's a lack of understanding and connection in our community in knowing what it really means for our teachers who have these 20, 25, 30, 35, whatever the numbers are, and in many cases they are too large. Students whom the teachers are expected to teach by not necessarily all of our own standards, but the federal government may have a say, the state has a say, the Department of Education says you have to do it this way. However, those pieces of information come down about the right way to do it. And yet we have a whole child who needs to learn the curriculum and needs to be fed well and needs to be, in many cases, taught social skills, and who may need to have some counseling, and Nancy referenced counseling in our schools. We were fortunate enough to be able to put them back in this year, and it's made a huge difference in identifying kids who really are struggling, and then the interventions that need to be put into place to help those kids. Because if you don't catch the problem quickly, it grows so much that it becomes more and more significant to the whole educational environment. So we're asking our teachers to be the person who is the delivery system to the growth of a whole child. And that's a huge thing for all of our public schools. And I'm not sure that our community understands the depth of that. And the other thing I would say too is that we're just having, our board has been going through something called the Oregon Lighthouse Project. And it's a commitment that the board made to have basically about 18 months worth of training on how to be good board members and how to seek the right information and how to know how to make sound decisions for the students in our district. And we were just talking this last week about the importance of the parent or the adult, or you could say, or the volunteers that are there, that are resources who are and can be important in a child's growth and development, and how do we make that connection? And we don't have the answer to that yet, but it's the question we're posing to ourselves. What is it that we can do? I mean, I'm retired, lots of people are retired. They may not think that they have something that they can offer. You spoke to volunteerism and the importance of that. And I think that's a huge connection that we could all benefit from if we could make that.
Kathy, thank you. And before Buzz, I get to you, we're going to actually give you an added bonus. So hold for one second.
Oh, no.
Kathy, if I could just make sure
Yes.
I'm fully understanding. One of the things that when we talk about public schools, sometimes it's easy to say, well, we just need to make teachers do more or do this or do that. And what I'm hearing from everybody along the way is that because of social structures, because of economies, because of perhaps the decline of the one-earner home, which no longer really exists in America, everybody's working and they don't necessarily have time for the kids. Really what's going on in the classroom has evolved and changed and really grown in terms of scope and scale and shape. And perhaps it's helpful to remember what I believe Churchill said about democracy when it comes to the public schools. It's the worst form of government until you consider all the alternatives. And that the way in which we do public education these days isn't perfect, but what are you going to do with the kid that shows up that hasn't eaten and can't learn? Are you going to send them away? Because ultimately, the public school system is trying to train citizens and workers that sustain the society over time. And as a college instructor, I think Dr. Dover may say yes to this, and some in the room that are also doing this. What can't get done in the K-12 system that used to be done because of really the amount of time, we're doing things in the classroom at college with students that we would never have done 15 years ago, not because the teachers at K-12 weren't trying to get everything they could, but because the load was so much and the boat was so small. I mean, they could only do so much. And that really has a pressure all across the system if you don't actually address it earlier than later. Is that a fair assessment? So Buzz, how about this? We're going to give you the chance to say the greatest challenge, and then you're the first to talk about what the tools we need, so you can actually ask and answer your own question. How about that?
That's a heck of an idea. In other words, Paul, I can talk to myself for about 10 minutes, is what you said.
Well, all of us as well, yes.
There you go.
Maybe 7.
First of all, actually, before I start, Tony, if you know, that I spent my last 7 years in the classroom teaching alternative kids. And so I have a heart for those kids. And those kids are kind of the kids I always use when I'm trying to formulate plans, thoughts, and ideas. And I would throw this out to you. Many of us know the Pew Research Center, and their data is well respected nationally and internationally. And here's what I can tell you. If you don't think this is important, go on the Pew data, look at the difference in life expectancy for students who do not have a high school diploma. They have a 10-year lower life expectancy than any other person. So if you don't think it's life or death, here's what I'm asking you to do. Walk around when you see a bunch of kids and point to the one that it's okay if they die 10 years sooner than the others. It's a very, very serious thing that we do. And some of the things I think that we have done in the things that Tony was talking about is I think we have created a dynamic dream deficiency. And we suffer from that dream deficiency because the last time I checked, and Tony may have much better numbers than I believe that I found there were 4,000 mechanics jobs in Western America that were open and unfilled, many at a higher beginning wage than most certificated degreed students would earn, but they're unfilled because we don't have kids going after them because we've killed their dream. We've got to reopen. We have to reignite that dream and make it something that is in every student. And I think that's a charge that we have in K-12 education, higher education, and adult education, because education is education. It's interesting to me how we've separated that and in many ways kind of pitted ourselves against one another because we're arguing for that almighty dollar. In my mind, there's 3 great challenges that face us at the K-12 level. One of them is alignment, a second is consistency, and a third is reliable funding stream. You know, I probably don't think we need quite as much money as I've heard some of the folks talk to us about. And the reason I don't think we need quite as much money added to the system is because I think there's tremendous potential for some of the money in the system to be either redirected or reused. At this point in time, even though we have districts that are very, very open to sharing and working with one another, Salem-Keizer and 20 other districts recently joined in helping form the Willamette Promise. And the Willamette Promise is going to offer high school students in all those 20 districts the opportunity to easily complete the first year of the Oregon Transfer Module, and in most cases, the second year of the Oregon Transfer Module, or complete a certification program in the CTE area while in high school at a significantly reduced rate. We partnered together because it makes sense for our kids, but those partnerships are somewhat not supported necessarily by some of the rules or regulations that we have to operate under. There are many efficiencies that we could certainly accommodate for both Salem-Keizer and the Central School District, even though we're significantly different in size, when we're asked to do some services for fewer people or fewer students, because it's just, that's the way they do it. They won't let us share them. So I think there's some real concerns with the consistency of what happens in alignment. Alignment between the state and federal government, between the waiver that we're operating under and No Child Left Behind. There's misalignment areas there. Alignment within the state guidelines. You've probably read recently the hubbub surrounding the number of hours in a classroom. Well, that you've got two laws. You've got a law that says we have to have 990 hours of education available, and there's a list, excuse me, of deductions that go along with that is considered classroom time. And then you have another law, relatively obscure, in what are called the Division 22 assurances that weren't required for 3 years, that said that also a student must have 130 hours of classroom time available to earn a credit. Well, those two don't align. And one, a schedule that provides you with 990 hours, actually 1,080 hours of instructional time, doesn't necessarily meet the 130 hours for two reasons. One, because maybe of days or horrible things such as assemblies. My God, those are just terrible to have. Those type of interruptions to education. And the fact that this set of rules down here for 130 and this set of rules for 990, they don't have the same exclusions. The things that you can exclude up here and still count, don't count down here, and vice versa. So alignment of programming would help, dramatically. Alignment between K-12 and higher education. Common core standards, excellent thing. I mean, let's not talk about curriculum. Let's define the difference between curriculum and standards. Okay, curriculum is what you use to teach the standards. The standards are what it is you need to get to. And a lot of the hubbub and concern I've heard about the Common Core standards really should be directed at curriculum, because somebody has chosen maybe a curriculum that has a tendency to be biased, but it's not the standards. In essence, what the standards have done in an oversimplification is they said what you used to have to do in your 11th grade, now you got to do it in 9th grade. It's the same set of standards, they just reduced them down 2 years. 1.5 to 2 years, depending upon the discipline and the course within that. So getting aligned with between higher education and K-12. The Willamette Promise I just talked about provides the 20 districts I referred to, the opportunity that we are going to be using professional learning communities that have Western Oregon, OIT, and Chemeketa Community College staff involved, professors involved with working with high school teachers to make sure that we are aligned, so what we're teaching is the same thing that they're expecting, so that now that void that you're talking about, Paul and Dr. Dover, won't necessarily be there, or we can begin to close it. And then I think consistency, as I talked about. A bill will be passed that emphasizes something, and then another bill will be passed that doesn't totally change it, but here again, we're being inconsistent and it's not aligning. And then I think a reliable funding stream. Many of us have cut. We were very fortunate this past year because of wise decisions made by the board and tough decisions that the board had to make. We were able to add back some things. We defined the bottom of our spiral this year, so now we're being able to add much more back than other districts. But a reliable funding stream so that we knew what it was that we were going to have. I think if we had those things, we would have the opportunity to begin to build that dream back into our students' minds. And you have to dream. And I would say for those of you that can't think of what does he mean by that, I think it was one of the playoff games in professional football. And it was a very, very tight situation. And they were talking about how tense I think the quarterback must have been. And oh my God, how is he going to survive this? And one of the announcers, who's an athlete, said, "What do you mean tense? He's done that 1,000,000 times in his backyard when he was 9 years old. He's been there with 8 seconds left to go. The further behind, he knows exactly, he's had that dream." Well, if our kids don't have a dream, we're going to have a hard time getting them to the goal line.
Thank you. So I want to make sure and synthesize what we've said. We're running a little bit long on time, but actually that's a good thing because we have, I think, identified many of the solutions or at least tools that we want to talk about. So what I'm going to try to do is go person to person and make sure I heard what you said so we could make sure the audience heard it. We're going to take a break after that. And then if there's something that you want to put out there before we open up for questions, you can. And then we'll open up for questions. Okay? So standards, alignment, and consistency in funding is what I'm hearing. What I'm hearing from Kathy is perhaps additional training for all board members, not just some, in terms of really how to make a nonprofit the size, shape, and scale work, and at the same time, better communication, better understanding in the community at large about what it is a school does and the impact of hunger, the impact of the economy upon the school and its pressure. What I heard from Tony is that the pilot program that's working right now in this area is really teaching us a lot of lessons that we maybe used to know but can certainly learn again, that working with your hands may or may not be dirty, but it actually can lead to a meaningful career, and we have to find a balance between encouraging people not to sit on the couch and play games the rest of their life, but to actually get involved in either, if not college for those types of pursuits, then high-tech apprenticeship programs that are modern 21st century skill sets that can be really put into the workforce, and these 4,000 jobs that are sitting out there plus jobs in the economy that are really idle because we haven't done that. What I heard from Salem-Keizer is you have cut so much just because of the size and scale of what you're doing that it's going to take some years to rebuild, and that one of the things the public may not be really keenly aware of is it takes a while for an aircraft carrier or for large things to get back onto track after you've been taken off track for so long. That the 41,000 students are being served as best you can, but you can't add back $142 million with $9 million.
Right, but I do not want to give the impression that the aircraft carrier is headed in the wrong direction.
I'm talking education system large, not the Salem, yes, no.
Salem-Keizer is headed in the right direction in
Yes.
spite of how dismal the economic situation is.
And the high school, please say again, that did the turnaround so you can make sure.
McKay High School.
McKay High School, yes. And in fact, whoever may be coming in as superintendent is inheriting a great aircraft carrier, a new aircraft carrier that's big and proud, but that the overall system of trying to regain what has been lost is still something that's going to have to be wrestled with over time.
Right.
Is that right?
We have buses that are as old as I am.
20 years old.
Or
15.
58.
Okay.
It's shocking, the
Yeah.
infrastructure that's been abandoned.
Right. And Dr. Dover, just so I understood, the 4 points that you were talking about having to do with the students, the teachers, the faculty, and the politicians. Staff. Politicians, of course, none in this room being part of the problem, but perhaps in another way. Not recognizing really that the faculty need to feel and be a part of the solution so there isn't a growing resentment in many cases, and at the same time an appreciation for the tasks that are going on inside the classroom, and appreciation for the staff that basically are the force multipliers that help the learning environment the college continue. Is that fair? And then Mario, basically the disinvestment in higher education overall is a challenge, and perhaps better communication strategies of trying to find ways so that people understand why a dollar spent in education today is actually worth 20 in the future, as opposed to wasted down the squirrel hole, compared to, was it $35,000 a year per inmate versus $2,500, something like that. And Vivian, way down at the end, you think that we forgot you, we didn't. The point on volunteerism, especially for your organization, what I'm hearing from you is you actually have a plan, you have things that are working well, but quite frankly, what you need is more people involved in the process to help more people, and it doesn't matter that they may or may not have in their mind the background that's necessary to be a mentor. Everybody has life experience. Everybody with a heart to serve can actually get involved and serve. Is that correct?
That's true. However, I will say that since we were talking about funding,
Okay. I wanted to give you that one last shot to get back in there, yes.
David C. Harvey, who is the past president and CEO of Pro Literacy International, which is the largest literacy organization in the world, says that statistics show that for every dollar invested in adult literacy programs in the community, it returns $33 to the economy of that community.
Can you say that again?
I will. David C. Harvey, former president and CEO of Pro Literacy International, says that statistics show that for every dollar invested in adult literacy programs in the community, it returns $33 to the economy of that community.
One of the things that I want to emphasize on that before we go to break is I was taught, actually one of the people that helped teach me is sitting at that table and the other one is sitting out in the audience, that government really, especially public education from K through 20, is really supposed to be far more focused on being effective than it is efficient. And that some things at first glance may not appear efficient in the short term that have long significant benefit over time. And whether it's investing in a kid or investing in an adult or quite frankly investing in that senior citizen who never learned how to read, that there are return benefits and that ultimately society as a whole gains when you have a strong central focus to be able to provide those types of skills and learning opportunities. Because if we're not learning throughout our life, we're probably not achieving all of our God-given gifts. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a 5-minute break, which means about 7 minutes. In 7 minutes, we'll start back up. We'll open up if you have about 3 or 4 questions. We're actually going to try to get everybody out here about 8:35, 8:45, somewhere in there. So it'll be a little bit long, but not much. Please go get some of the cookies and the drinks and all the stuff that is provided. We're going to take a 5-minute break. All right, we're going to start back up. This is, again, for setting, so we started the appropriate way. We're coming back into the discussion held on April 23rd. It is, in fact, still April 23rd. I know the evening has gone by. It's gone by very fastly, but it's still actually the 23rd. We're talking about education and workforce readiness, and we are talking with our esteemed panel about lots of great things and some challenges. And I want to emphasize again, the Salem-Keizer School District is amazing. It is not the aircraft carrier I was looking and alluding to. That change is sometimes like an aircraft carrier, takes a while. So just wanted to make sure you get that point before Nancy beats me up later. So questions from the audience. You've got folks here with expert. Yeah, please stand up and say the question. I'm going to repeat the question so people listening on TV can hear it, and then we'll go from there.
I'm an on-the-ground educator in the Salem-Keizer District.
Okay.
And I know I've heard you guys talk about a lot of challenges and issues and that kind of thing, but on the ground here with Common Core, and as a science educator, basically in primary anyway, I'm wondering how you guys feel about STEM education and next generation science standards.
And STEM education being science, technology,
Engineering and mathematics.
engineering, and mathematics. Okay. Any takers on STEM education? Buzz?
Lori, I happen to be a chemistry teacher. I did take the word STEM and changed it to STEAM because I think.
That's what I want to do STEAM, but nobody in the state
Yeah,
does STEAM.
I think STEAM is a far better component to the STEM education. That's part of one of the things I think we've had when we lost the dream and the idea of getting a job or getting the technical component of it. Things became hands-off. And STEM is very hands-on education. And I think that as we see the Salem and South Metro STEM group organization grow, I know we've worked with Western Oregon on a grant that we have some STEM in. I think that STEM absolutely has to become a real strong component of all that we do in education. And of course, being a science teacher, if you look at the scientific method, it'll solve most problems in any section, but I didn't want to say anything about science. I think the other part of it, though, is why we're seeing some bumps in starting some things and I think some frustration in it is because until we get the targets and the standards established by the state, we're not sure how to fit everything in.
Okay, then
For science and mathematics.
where are we with next gen then?
A follow-on.
In terms of the state?
Okay, we're using a lot of acronyms. I just want to make sure we're clear.
Next generation science standards that have come in, they're part of Common Core, but scientists created them.
Before,
They're separate.
before we get to next gen, if we could actually explain the difference between STEM and STEAM for those of us that are not science people.
It has an A for arts.
Yeah, it adds arts to it.
That makes sense to me. Okay. So next question is next generation.
To the next generation science standards.
Next generation.
Which
Where are we? Is that the
incorporate
question?
All of that stuff, and it has also a literacy
Buzz, you can hit it, but also if we want to open up to other folks that may have.
I'll look.
Go ahead.
Yeah. They haven't been finalized by the state yet, you know, and we have,
And when you say the state, Buzz, what agency now, under the changes, is it still ODE, Oregon
Yeah.
Department of Education?
What
has
happens
a
is the
sense?
state of Oregon is on an adoption schedule, and we as school districts are provided the opportunity, or the necessity, frankly, to review the pieces of curriculum that are identified by the state of Oregon that are acceptable in, as far as being adopted as curriculum within the school district. And we are sitting now in a couple areas where we do not have some adopted curriculum that has been approved. And one of the areas, as an example, is mathematics, where interestingly enough, the mathematics standards that we are going to be testing on next spring when the SBAC, the Smarter Balanced Assessment, starts, okay? Those standards will finally be approved around November or December of next year. We will then begin testing on them in March and not have had the materials until the following years to teach it within the class. When you're talking about alignment, those are some of the alignments there that are difficult.
So for someone who's not in a K-12 environment, just so I understand, and I'm seeing the look, so I think you're going to know where I'm going to go with this. Public school kid who was not very good at math and spent a lot of time in the military, so I have to use colors. The red line here for the test is in March.
Mhm.
We don't know how high we have to jump until November. And the curriculum.
December is when we're guaranteed it.
Okay,
supposedly.
so December, and on the other side of March, next year is when we get the materials to find out how we're going to learn how to jump.
You got it.
Okay.
A lot of that issue though is Common Core is new to everybody.
Yeah.
And so a
And
lot of
again-
textbook companies have not come
Yeah.
out
Right,
with
so-
all supportive materials yet. So we're all kind of being behind the ballgame unless we're creating our own stuff right now.
Yeah.
So the
Absolutely.
question, if I could maybe put this point to people that are tuning in and maybe the audience, when you talk about Common Core, for somebody who, again, looking at education, not a K-12 person, I look back and I say, boy, in Oregon, when I grew up, things seemed to be pretty good. I learned how to do most things and be able to, take care of myself most of the time. Then we had some changes in the early 2000s. Then we had No Child Left Behind thrust upon us. Then we had basically a fight for growth modeling that I don't know what happened with that. And then we had the race to the top. And now we have something called Common Core that's not actually, if I understand correctly, from the feds as much as states are pushing it through state-to-state relationships. Is that correct? The feds are buying off on it?
46 states have
Yeah.
signed on to it, and it came out of the governor's, the National Governors Conference, and it was developed by educators at the encouragement of the national governors. Because prior to this, we had standards in Oregon,
Right.
and different standards in Washington, and different standards so when you're looking at test scores, you could learn the material in Oregon and pass the test and go to a different state and not pass the test, or you could fail the test in Oregon and go to another state and, knock it out of the park.
Right.
Because there was such a variety in standards. So when you're looking at whose students are doing the best, how you're comparing apples to oranges to grapefruit to kiwis.
So is it fair to say, because I know people that have been watching the education process evolve, because there's lots of new acronyms, Oregon Investment Boards this and changing the boards that it is probable, because I'm not going to say that as a politician we promise things, but it is probable that within the next 36 to 48 months-ish, somewhere there, some of these alignment issues will be, if not dealt with, then modified so that people can actually figure out how to pass the test and jump as high with the curriculum that tells them how to jump. And at the same time, Common Core will be less of a phrase and more of a reality as ideas that are put into statute become policy and policy becomes plans and plans become curriculum. Is that basically?
It's already there. We're just behind the ball in implementing it so far.
And is that
But it's
a
already there. Those are the expectations. That's what our EPR is all about. We're all based on.
EPR?
Progress reports, elementary progress.
Elementary progress
I'm so sorry, you guys. I
No, no,
don't
no.
know educational jargon either.
But the reason I'm asking the question is because the folks that are tuning in on CCTV are going to get smarter about this too. So we're all learning together. So
Well, and I think that Salem-Keizer has seen these standards coming and
Mhm.
has moved
We moved
forward.
fast.
So we're not waiting until November to see what they decide. We see the writing on the wall and are
Right.
moving forward.
And
And I'm sure Central is too.
And
Yes.
here again, I think the comment here is that I was trying to make, it's not about, I mean, everybody's been working on the Common Core for years. However, when you don't have that document in front of you showing the adopted curriculum, you're picking and choosing and doing your best you can to make guesses. And that, to me, in a high-stakes situation, I would tell you, if we're driving, let's put it this way, you're in an airplane, okay?
That I
You're-
understand.
You're in an airplane. You have the opportunity to have two people landed. Somebody who has the manual, who has been well-trained and been in a simulator and done it over and over and over. Or you can have a person who plans to get in the simulator as soon as they get on the ground. Which one do you want to land, Jane?
The Air Force guy.
Yeah?
But how about the creative person that's out there, though?
So,
I
We
think
need to have people
that,
for creative.
but I'm looking at all kids, not just the 30 that have the creative ones.
so on this point, to kind of, I get your point that we want to know certainty, and that's an important issue. As a person who wants to be in state government at some point, I'm hoping that the laws have already been passed, and this is actually for experts to figure out, but it seems like this issue certainly needs to be brought up for further discussion. So let's kind of put this on the shelf to talk about it more, okay? And we will. Are there other particular questions that people want to talk about, having to do with literacy, having to do with job readiness, having to do with the structures and systems of education? Yes, sir.
How much of the education issues are a matter of integrity? For example, it seems to be what used to take an associate's degree now takes a BA, what takes a BA now takes an MA. It would seem that a lot of people are investing a tremendous amount of money and not necessarily connecting to the educational system, constantly moving forward. Case in example, a lot of kids go to Northwest Culinary Institute up in Portland, Oregon, and I know that Clark Community College and a lot of the other community colleges provide just as good an education, but they don't seem to connect it, and it seems like it's a vanishing horizon for a lot of people.
So we get kind of our arms wrapped around the particular question. The question is, when you use the word integrity, it's not about people, it's about
The institution.
the institution or the certificate.
Yeah.
Does this equate to that? And is there equality in terms of how a bachelor's from one place is a bachelor's from another, or training for an associate's to another associate's?
I guess what I see is kind of a constant inflation. It used to be grade inflation, now it seems to be degree inflation. You move from what used to require, for example, teaching, now starts at the master's level. It used to simply require a BA plus a certification.
So we're talking basically post-high school.
Probably post-high school, but also
Okay.
it goes all the way down. You know, there's no particular reason why somebody getting out of high school shouldn't have the necessary shop skills that, say, a union apprentice would have.
Okay, so let's focus on higher education first. Ed, you've been teaching for a while. What have you seen in terms of the inflation or the integrity evolution?
Well, I think that's been consistent, is that we're seeing more and more requirements have changed. Let me give you a story that I like to use in my classes about that. I was in the Army back in the 1960s, and when I was about ready to get out, I saw a poster that had been put up about places, cities around the country trying to recruit police officers. And I wasn't necessarily going to go in that direction, but I was looking at it, a little curious, and in one case quite surprised what I saw. But one of them, it would say, to be a police officer, you must have the following background. Anyway, most of them would require a high school education, but the one that I found was amusing was Chicago, which required a 6th grade education and a letter of recommendation from your Democratic ward chairman. But so I think we've seen a lot more credentials there. But for the most part, though, I think we have seen a continual increase in credentials. I'm not sure if it necessarily is improving. I think part of it is that we've found that a lot of it is a result of more requirements, in some cases less money. I think we've heard here that we have less ability to teach people at some of the lower grades, and I think this is kicked up and more or less going to higher levels.
Does anybody want to take a whack at this one as well?
I'm a nurse. I have a bachelor's degree in nursing and a master's degree in nursing, and I got my bachelor's degree in 1978, and my daughter got a bachelor's degree in nursing in 2012, and the difference in what she learned and what I learned is like night and day. You know, the complexity of the job. And I'm on the school board with Chris Brantley, who taught in Salem-Keizer schools and other schools, was an administrator for many, many years. He's a Willamette grad. He had a degree in biology and went out and got a teaching job and taught. He never had any education classes. There's the expectations that are put on teachers today are significantly more rigorous than were put on him as a teacher. When I went to school, teachers stood in front of the classroom and imparted knowledge, and it was the student's job to get the knowledge and use it effectively. Today, teachers teach a lesson, give a little pre-test, teach a lesson, give a little post-test, and evaluate what the kids got and what they didn't get. And if there are chunks of it missing, it's incumbent upon the teacher to go back the next day and fill in the gaps. It's much more complex than it used to be. And do I think it requires more education than it used to? You bet I do.
Okay. Any other question? Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
I would like to address it from
Please.
the GED.
Yes.
Because most of you are probably familiar with the fact that the GED was changed as of January 2nd. And in the past, from our experience, we are working with about 600 students a year now, and about half of those are GED. The experience we have seen is that the former GED program was requiring about 6 to 9 months of preparation for a person to achieve that GED certificate. With the new GED requirements being much higher, aligned to the Common Core state standards, and intending to prepare people truly for college ready and work ready, the requirement will probably take 1.5 years to maybe even 2 years for a person to achieve that. And I'm talking about adults who have limited literacy skills, which is the population that we're working with. If someone has recently dropped out of high school to try to get the GED, they've got the basic foundation that is already being put in, for example, through Salem-Keizer. We see those students coming with those skills already. But when an adult who is 35, 40, 50, even 60 years old trying to come in, they do not have the computer skills, and the new GED is all computer-based. And you have someone who has done manual labor, now cannot get a job, and they're trying to learn typing skills. The requirement for the new GED, the recommendation is that someone be able to have keyboarding at 40 words per minute, or they won't be able to pass the GED with the time allotment that is required. So yes, of course it's a much higher standard, but what we're requiring for people on the job is a higher standard. So there's no way to get around it. It is going to be required.
Thank you. My dad, who I will pick on because he's not here, who still does hunting and pecking, he's not going to be terribly happy about that new GED thing. He's going to have to change some of his lectures. All right. 2 more questions with the time we have. Yes, sir. We'll start with you, and then we'll roll to Jackie. Go ahead.
I was very excited to hear some of the comments about the increased relevance and increased interest in what I call vocational education. You'll pardon use of an old term, vocational technical education. A concern I have, given that behind so many of the comments and behind so much of the experience that we've had, is that monies are limited. Education is just one of the fields within which we're fighting for dollars. Is the new move toward increased vocational education going to put increased pressures to divide an already too small pie? Or are we dealing with a system at the legislative level, at the state level, Department of Education, that is going to somehow allow us to appropriately shift resources?
So again, people may not have heard the full question that are watching. If I understand the question, the discussion of voc ed, the discussion of STEM and STEAM and more hands-on applied learning modeling or opportunities, is that going to put added pressure on finite resources, or is there an expectation that we will find new paths or new partnerships to be able to open up additional funding? Is that a fair assessment? Who'd like to start with that one? Buzz, and then we'll...
I'd like to go from this point. Here's a great opportunity for Tony and I to partner, or Tony's organization, another educational partner. He just talked about a group that's in our community, LK, all right? And what he just talked about is, of course, LK said, boy, we really would hope that you would apply. Imagine for a second a situation that showed that Tony, the Central School District, and LK would partner so that you had students in there that were working and gaining skills while they're working with the people. I think there probably wouldn't be even much of an application process. It would just be an endorsement process. So I think a third component is that I think it's tough, and you're talking about this type of education, to have these schools keep up with all of the changes. And if we're trying to keep up with them, we're chasing a financial hill that we're trying to climb a financial hill we'll never climb. But we can through relationships, we can climb that hill in partnership with our community partners. And I know Tony and I are working with RAC and other things to help that occur, but that's, I think, an area where we can...
With some additional funding, as opposed to a whole new system, but some additional funding to help make the partnership more possible. Is that...
And a little bit of professional development on the side of the company themselves.
Okay.
Sometimes it's not just a money issue, it's an alignment issue again, in terms of bringing the right partners together to have the pieces. So in that scenario, LK even said, because they use a temp agency for the first 90 days, that if we could produce the workers that they're looking for, they'll eliminate the temp agency and hire direct. So companies are willing, I believe, to figure out ways to align so that we can leverage these kinds of partnerships.
To that point, a question before we go down the line, and we will. Are there rules, or because it's a K-12 environment, are there rules or safety restrictions or things like that that would need to be a magic waiver or some type of review board to be able to make sure that students are still in a safe environment, but in a work, I mean, are there those type of alignment issues that need to be considered, or they have already been thought through?
Well, you probably need to answer that from a district perspective then, because I get outside of that sometimes and do certain things. I don't always ask permission, I guess. I don't know.
It's always better to ask for forgiveness, yes, that's what they taught in the military.
Strike that out of the...
Not that he would ever need to ask for forgiveness.
He's not on that aircraft carrier. No, I mean,
I'm on that alone.
Just trying to help kids here.
We have kids out doing job shares, shadows all the time. That's just a matter of covering it in your liability coverage. That's not an issue.
I think there's a real problem with what you just mentioned about vocational versus academic, but I think there's somewhat of a solution to this, and I think we need to change the processes that we have of budgeting in the state. I teach a class in governmental budgeting, and it's amazing the differences that we find between the federal, state, or within the state. The federal government requires at every stage of the budget process there be a 5-year financial plan. And in some cases, those financial plans are even more extensive. If you look at the budget put out by the Obama White House, you can see projections for up to 10 years of what we're going to be spending on Medicare, and what we're going to be spending on defense, and what we're going to be spending on transportation. And I might point out to Paul is that there are plans to construct 2 new aircraft carriers. One of them has already been named, and it will start construction in a couple of years, and the other one will begin in about 7 years. It's not named yet, but the plans are there. In the state of Oregon, we have a capital budget which has a 6-year plan. Since we operate in bienniums, we do 3 different bienniums. And some of the things I do in my class is to have a budget exercise for the students to go through the state budget and find out some things about capital construction. So I would give them a worksheet and have things on there. Mainly I want them to find it and know how to read it. What are the plans for construction at the University of Oregon in the year 2019? And those are there. And what are we planning on spending on other things for capital construction? And all of those are there, along with the plans for financing. And in the state budget, you can find just how much capital money the state of Oregon owes, even into 2048, about how much interest we're going to pay on how much debt we've incurred constructing buildings. Now, try to find an academic plan. Try to find an operating plan. You can't find one. We have crisis management year to year in which at the state level, at the agency level, at the university level, at the department level, that we have crisis management. That we don't know for sure how much money we're going to have 2 years from now. I think we have a dean of education here who I think would realize that you know, do you have a 10-year plan, or could you even hope to have a 10-year plan? In terms of academics, the money is never there. And I think what we need to do is to try to take this operating plan that we have for money, the academic plan, and link it in some way like we've seen these others do. Come up with a 5 to 10-year plan so we know where we're going. Because if we don't, it ends up crisis management, and we'll spend money in ways that are inconsistent, that don't follow a pattern, and can change abruptly from year to year.
Okay, we're going to take one more question, and then after that question, we're going to give everybody a chance to say a really quick last word if something was missed, and then we're going to make sure and get out of the beautiful facility that's been provided for us on time. So, yes, ma'am, your question.
I don't know if my question's even relevant at this point. When are we going to teach, and in what stage? It sounds like already in the college you're teaching, you know, classes of critical thinking. But someplace along the line, we have forgotten how to teach our kids critical thinking, because they cannot figure out. I mean, I've been registering voters for the last 3 weeks, and our kids, college kids, cannot figure out what the heck is, when you ask them to register to vote, they say for what? And when you talk about the primary, or you talk about the parties, and I'm not trying to bring politics into this, but that's where I'm seeing it, these kids cannot figure that out.
So is that critical thinking or civics?
Well, either, both of them, because you have to think about, when you're talking about registering to vote, you have to think about what your values are, and where do they come from, and what do you support. Those are all things that you have to think about. They're not even anywhere near there, you know, and that I find really scary, that in this day and age, people can't figure out basic stuff. Like, they don't even know that we have a primary in this state. They don't even know what parties they are and what the parties stand for. Okay, and this is what our future is going to be. So, you know, I understand where the funding issues come from. You know, I agree wholeheartedly that vocational training is probably one of the main ways to go for a lot of the students, and that, because that's hands-on, they can actually figure out doing it, okay? But if they can't even think clearly on how, when you see in the newspaper, in the Statesman Journal, that they ask the kids, little kids question, like, where does gum come from? And you see these 50 kids answer the question of where gum comes from. It's like, you know, why don't you ask them something that makes some kind of, that they can think about, really think about something.
Well,
you know, I hope someplace that it's going on
I think
somewhere.
you're talking about millennials, and that's just.
so
I'm just talking about kids today, you know, and I've done lots of registration of voters, folks. It's not 1 or 2 people that I've talked to. You know, I sat at Temecula for 3 days. I was here for part of the day. I was at Willamette for 3 days, okay? So,
well, so just the
I don't know
question,
if this makes sense.
maybe instead of a question, more of a commentary that clearly critical thinking should be emphasized, whether it's called Common Core or not, but in that system, and I know that people are talking about that. And a point that I emphasize everywhere I go, it's great that we train wonderful workers. It would be nice if we actually trained people that understood how the most complicated government in human history worked. But we're running short on time, so what I'd like to do is go through the panel, that you have one final word, and then we're going to conclude so we can return this wonderful facility back to the college and university that provides it. So, Buzz.
I think for me, there's a tool that we haven't talked about, and I think is a very important tool, and that's one of time. When you put time into a factor, not all of us learn in the same rate. Not all of us are able to do things at the same rate, but we don't give time as an asset to our teachers in helping our students learn. And I think time is important. The only way we use time is in how we created the system. And what I mean by that is if you look at it this way, I'm going to talk about how our public education system was created. First of all, we go to school from September to June. Why? It's the agricultural school. It's called the agrarian schedule. We go to school Monday through Friday because, of course, you can't go to school on the Sabbath. And when you get back to World War II, Rosie the Riveter, Mama was working as Daddy was fighting, so you had to have them. And you went from 8 to 4 because of the same reason. And when you calculate how your school day is, you find out how many periods you decide to use, and then you have your contracted time that you're at school. You subtract your time that gets you to go from class to class. You subtract out lunch, you divide it by the number. Miraculously, you say our periods are going to be 50 minutes long, 60 minutes long, 70 minutes long, 80 minutes long. And I would suggest to you that every school in the country starts at exactly the same time, and it ends at exactly the same time. And the first thing you're going to say is, no, our schools start at different times. No, they don't. They all start at the same time. They all start about 15 minutes after the buses have arrived. Okay? And they all end just about 15 minutes before the buses leave. We've used time to create that system and not once talked about student learning. If we would take that time and put it in student learning and allow us to have that kind of flexibility to help student learners, I think we could accomplish a lot of the things we talked about tonight.
Okay, we need to wrap up. If you have something to say, please do. If not, you can pass it. It's okay.
I could pass.
I would just say that I'm encouraged by our community's abilities, and more people are coming to the table to create partnerships and alignment and collaboration. And I think one of the things that I see that's exciting is that most people are realizing if we don't do that, we're never going to accomplish some of these visions that we have to make our community better. And it's happening, and I'm encouraged by that.
I just want to add to alignment that we close the feedback loops, that we have feedback from, in our system, we have feedback from elementary to middle, middle to high. We're missing feedback at the bottom from preschool programs. You're sending his kids ready for kindergarten or you're not, and where the deficits are. And we have really poor feedback with universities to say, this is how your kids are doing specifically. So that would inform a lot if we could close those loops.
I'd like to see a change in the state collective bargaining laws. Collective bargaining laws today limit the scope of negotiations to salaries, benefits, and working conditions. And as a result of that, I think what this does is create an adversarial relationship between academic school administrators and teachers that doesn't need to be there. What I would like to see is a change in which the implementation of academic policy would be made a mandatory issue. If you're not familiar with how this works, in collective bargaining, all issues are put into 3 categories: either mandatory, they must be negotiated; prohibited, they can't be; or permissive, if both sides want to. But almost invariably, the implementation of academic policy is either prohibited or permissive, and it doesn't go anywhere. And as a result of this, we have a whole lot of activity taking place around things that really don't deal with standards. I've seen many times when we get this missive from on high, these are the new assessments patterns. I had nothing to say about creating them and nothing to say about implementing them, and generally ignore them until they go away. And then we get another one, a year later, somebody else sends it. But I think it would be far better if there was a significant structural requirement of faculty involvement in this.
Thank you. Mario?
There are a couple things I want to say. I sort of want to address your question about critical thinking and just say that I think that there should be a return to civics learning at a very young age. I think your budget course should be taught in middle and high school. I find that most students don't understand the system, or folks that I work with in general don't understand the system, so they don't participate, and they're discouraged from participating. I also believe like a shared governance needs to be a priority of students, staff, and faculty, especially in universities where we're seeing these independent boards pop up, and staff and students and faculty who have the largest stake in universities are being silenced or told that they're not as equal to everybody else on the board, and that their voices could be of conflict of interest to the conversations that those boards have. So I think shared governance needs to be a priority, and a united front of all of the stakeholders, everybody in this room, people who aren't here, working together to move our education issues and policies forward.
Thank you.
I would just like to address one of the issues that you mentioned regarding civics. Most of you may be aware that with the immigrant population, those folks that are acquiring U.S. citizenship, most of those folks do become voters. And we have had, in the last 5 years, 75 of our citizenship students who have achieved that. In fact, we have 100% success. They all pass the immigration requirements for the interview and the exam for their English skills and their civics and history. And many of those questions, you're right, people today wouldn't know how to answer. But the immigrants do know how to answer them. They do know how to get involved, and they are voting. I would like to say one more thing. I agree with what Tony said, that I believe that it's a real positive thing in our communities, and that is the collaboration between agencies and nonprofits, as we are, as well as with businesses. I see a great potential for more collaboration, and the more we do that as we work together, the better we will have in our community a whole great group of people who are ready for work, who are doing the jobs, and the more collaboration we can have, the greater we are going to produce that kind of a society.
In closing, just a few comments. I want to say thank you again to the panel. I want to say thank you to Dr. Molly Mayhead, who made the event possible, and all the folks that helped. In closing, two quotations from folks that may still have something to teach us. First is from former Governor Tom McCall, that used to say, or at least has said and has been repeated many times, that heroes are not giant statues framed against a red sky. They're people that stand up and say, this is my community, it's my responsibility to make it better. The second one is more of a paraphrase of what de Tocqueville looked at when he saw America in the 1800s about voluntary associations. That in America, people actually got together and did things collaboratively as a community because it mattered, they knew it mattered, and they wanted something better, not just for themselves, but for their family, their children, their nation. These panelists have brought forward great ideas. If you're interested in being a part of the solution, the website is WillametteValleyIdeaFactory.com. Yesenia's going to be working on bringing these ideas together. If you have an interest in a particular priority, a particular proposal for consideration, or just want to be part of learning more about this process, we encourage everybody that's interested to join in. We need as many hands lifting up the hard work as possible. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. I want to give everybody, and hopefully you'll join me in giving a round of applause to the panel and to the audience. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it. Great comments. And the three things you're talking about, I'd like to follow the alignment piece. What specifically?